Hey, we are live. Yet another Ask Us Anything session. After 1 week pause, we'll have more pauses in the future because we'll start traveling. But until then, here we are. Scott is with me, and we're going to try to answer any questions you might have. If you don't have questions, we're going to close the shop. So let's go with the first one. From Patrick, is there a valid reason why one would choose Nginx over Traffic or vice versa as Ingress controller? I never went deep into performance comparisons. I don't know whether you did, Scott.
I haven't with Traffic. I have with Nginx versus like Contour and other tools, but not with Traffic specifically.
Let me guess, Nginx loses that one.
So yes, it does. Nginx also, in my mind, loses in terms of the fact that there isn't a CRD and there's just 25 million annotations that you have to know, which makes it, on one hand, the most extensible and most use cases can be covered by it of any Ingress controller, but also the least possible to understand without going through the documentation online.
Yeah, and look, if I need to write more than few annotations, I freak out. Kind of that. I don't want to do that. No.
Exactly. So,
but
yeah.
That brings me that, to my knowledge, and I might be wrong. Traffic, I'm comparing those two. It has the what's the name? Gateway API implementation, while Nginx doesn't. I think that
Nginx does. No, hold on. There is for Nginx, but it's not Ingress Nginx. There is Nginx Gateway project. Again, it's just a separate project, but yeah.
Okay, but is it same umbrella?
Yeah, same umbrella, but different. Well, which Ingress Nginx are you talking about? Nginx Ingress or Ingress Nginx?
Or F5 Nginx.
Exactly. So it's under the same umbrella as one of those. I don't remember which one.
The one from Kubernetes, whichever one of those is under the Kubernetes org.
So I do not believe it's under Kubernetes org, the Gateway API implementation of Nginx. Yeah. But I think it's under the Nginx org, if I remember correctly. But I may be wrong.
Well, there you go. Not much of an answer, but there you go.
I will say that on that, with Nginx, though, I will say one thing. There's two things. One, Nginx will be the easiest to use for most people if they're not trying to do anything special, because almost every Helm chart, the examples have the annotations for Nginx specifically of what you want. So it's kind of like that de facto standard out there that, like if there's going to be an example, it'll include Nginx annotations. So that's one benefit, but Nginx is the data plane over like Envoy. I would always choose something that's Envoy based, both for capabilities, but also Nginx has to reload the configuration when it changes, and that can cause some weird network challenges. So yeah, I stay away from Ingress Nginx as much as possible, but for simple use cases, it may be the easiest, just not the best.
Okay, the next one from Cabral. Is DevOps market still worth it? To me, the more I spend time in DevOps, the more I feel like pursue for the IDP pathway. I mean, it seems more efficient and valuable. I think that those are the same thing, give or take. I see DevOps as a cultural shift and platform engineering being implementation of DevOps. I never agreed with the idea that there is something like a DevOps engineer, right? Just as there is no agile engineer. So I see platforms as being implementation of DevOps. And in my head, that's two coins of the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, if we look at this from not the true perspective, like, which I believe is true, which me and you agree on that, I think that like DevOps is very much though like painted as like GitHub Actions, Jenkins, Kubernetes, whatever, and platform engineering is Crossplane and Backstage and Port and like all these like the cool technologies that came in after platform engineering became a thing are like being colored as platform engineering. What I will say is that none of those things, you will never be able to succeed in any of those if you do not know what is colored as DevOps today. If you don't know Kubernetes, good luck understanding Crossplane. If you don't understand GitHub Actions or Jenkins or some CI system, good luck understanding how to do Backstage correctly in terms of building templates and all of that. So, like, you have to know it together, but yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I think you're right. What my answer was more like kind of from how it should be, but in practice... I think that what you were speaking about is in practice, Jenkins administrators became DevOps engineers. And I'm using Jenkins as an example. You can change word Jenkins to whatever you want. And then platform engineering, which is give or take the same thing, or technical aspect of it, is kind of, okay, let's actually, now that we're going to change the name of the role again, let's actually now assume that it's the same thing with different tools. In a way, now it's Crossplane, right? Or whatever you're using.
Yeah.
Now, before we go to the next question, very quick, we have the first time in history of this channel or this series, not this channel, we have a sponsor. Oh, I need to remove the comment. Where is it? There we go. Codefresh gives you 50% discount if you use Victor as a word over there for the course and certification. If you want to be GitOps ninja or learn about GitOps or be certified in GitOps or whatever people do with GitOps, go to learning.codefresh.io, put Victor, my name with K, not C, as the discount code somewhere over there in the page, and you get 50% off. I suspect, I'm not 100% sure, I suspect that big part, if not whole course, was done by Kostis. And if I'm right, he's absolutely brilliant. He's the best content creator I've seen. Absolutely amazing guy. Anyways, Codefresh, thank you for sponsoring. You, everybody listening, watching, go there, check it out. Please do. For no other reason, because we want them to come back and sponsor another episode so that... the goal is to buy a camera for, you know what, for every time I do a thumbnail, I download the recording of previous session. And it takes me half an hour to find a screenshot of Scott that is not blurred because of his silly camera. So go and take a course so that we can buy camera for Scott. That's the message. Okay? That was not probably the way how you promote stuff, but there you go. It's done. Let's see. Hello, about Gateway API. What do you do when you need more features like OIDC, Xtout, rate limit? Every popular Ingress offers Gateway API support, but the docs are usually very incomplete. I haven't been doing OIDC through Gateway API, so I'm not sure. Rate limit. So now, what I am sure is rate limit, for example, that's really not in the domain of, and correct me, Scott, when I say something silly, that's not really a domain of Ingress, that's more in domain of service mesh, which in case of Gateway API would be Gamma project. Is it Gamma? Gamma? I'm not sure. One of those.
Gamma. Gateway API management for mesh, I think, or something like that. Yeah.
Yes, one of those. It starts with G, Gamma, with 2 M's, something like that. Anyways, that's coming, right? It started with as a standardization of Ingress, but it is moving towards service mesh. Not as implementation, just to make it clear. There is no implement. This is spec, right? And as far as I know, rate limit is one of those that is already in the Gamma spec.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff around this. I completely agree that Gateway API has a lot of features that are being added that simply are not well documented. Still, the coverage of Gateway API from each provider. It's one of those challenges where Gateway API has a bunch of like optional things as well in its conformance. So even if providers are conformant Gateway API implementations, they don't necessarily implement everything yet. I've been kind of like holding off on Gateway API, using it more in like dev testing, getting used to it, getting that. For production, it's still a bit difficult because it still is a bit of rough edges, but I think it's getting a lot better, and we'll see a major change this year, I think. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
Next one from A Dude. That's my interpretation of your nick. What would be a good tool to keep an asset catalog for engineers to use as a reference? And I will split that question into there is a catalog of a desired state and the runtime state, right? Or actual state, or whatever you want to call it. And the latter falls very much into the domain of that guy over there. Look at him.
Backstage.
Yes. Or any other service catalog, kind of like, just to be clear. Basically.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Backstage. Or port, or I don't know what else is there. Whatever.
Cortex, or in a bunch of them.
Yeah. The thing that I was very much against, and that thank you Scott, changed, is that the runtime catalog, I will call it like that, initially in Backstage was supposed to be, hey, you define some stuff and then you push it to Git, and then kind of like your runtime information is in Git, which is either me interpreting Backstage very wrongly or just silly. But now we are moving into the direction that actually you get runtime information, which is probably what you're looking for.
Yeah.
He's speechless, but it's his plugin. You need to check it out. It's great. TerraSky. Now I have a complaint about your company, man.
What?
I always end up searching Terra with 2 R's.
That's your fault, not mine.
Yeah, that's true.
What can you do? TerraSky is 1R, but exactly. So yeah, it's github.com, TerraSky OSS Backstage plugins. There's a bunch of plugins there that do this. So yeah.
Okay. Now this is a strange one. I will say in advance, I don't think I have the answer, or at least satisfying. GK with local SSDs in a multi-tenant cluster can we isolate users to certain part of the SSD, of the same SSD? I will add. As far as I know, the answer is no. But I don't know.
To a specific part of an SSD. The question is, what does that mean, a specific part of the SSD? If you mean specific sectors or vectors on the actual disk itself, I don't believe that is humanly possible. What you could do is, break it up into multiple, volumes, different mount points, and then you could, through policies and whatnot, only allow host path or allow the provisioning of local persistent volumes to specific paths, and then you could separate that way, but it's a logical separation and not a physical separation of the, pieces on the SSD.
It's not physical, but if you give, and I don't know whether you can do it in GK SSD, but if you give everybody a different volume that points to a different directory, you have some kind of,
And there's no reason you couldn't. The second it's local SSDs, unless you're an autopilot, if it's local, you use local path provisioner, and even not their out-of-the-box one, and you could do that, right? It's just a question of if you want to.
Oh, I missed the part local. But
yeah.
That's gone.
Again,
the moment the node is gone.
That's what I was about to say. I am 100% against local volumes in 99.999999% of cases. There are very few use cases where for Redis or something like that, where you may want to have a backup storage that anyways it will repopulate over time, but you want to be able to restart the pods and all of that and still keep that data fine, maybe. but I think that all things should be network attached storage or software defined storage with local SSDs of something like Portworx, OpenEBS, whatever it ends up being, that Longhorn, that,
Yeah, but then
aggregate.
those wouldn't be local anymore, right? Because they would involve replication.
But if you use Portworx, they have data locality, right? So it is writing to local. It's going to also create a replica if you want onto a secondary node, but it writes locally. You're reading from local, so you get near performance of local SSD with replication, though. And then they have Stork, which basically will schedule your pod. If it gets restarted and that node goes down, it'll reschedule it on the node that has that data locally as well. So
but
that
effectively in practice, it's not local in literal sense of words. Kind of like
right. You're still going through a virtual file system. You're going through a virtual file system. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Another one from Edude. How do you measure productivity in platform engineering? I feel the usual ones, Dora, etc., are more meant for software engineering. I have a silly measure there. And that's voluntary adoption.
So I think voluntary adoption, I think that it's in the end the success of the... So developers and software engineering are measured based off of, let's say, Dora metrics. You are measured based off of the improvement to those Dora metrics.
On them, not you.
Relative to exactly. You're not you are measured. Platform engineering is there to serve the end users. Therefore, their success is your success. The way that we know if platform engineering, if your platform is good, is did it bring value to the company? So from the developer side, it would be that, the Dora metrics. It would be, has the level of security compliance within the organization gone up? Has the test coverage gone, whatever you are implementing to help your developers in specific areas through the platform, adoption rate of those things and the improvement in their relative metrics accordingly is how you measure your value.
Yeah, so basically you are measured by other people. Measurements.
Correct.
Right? Not directly.
AWS are measured based off of the fact that they have the #1 Kubernetes offering in the world in terms of numbers, right? It's like in the end, the consumers of it, they know that they built a good enough service of EKS. How? Because 50% of the world is using that as their Kubernetes distribution, right? Like, so like in the end, it's all who I'm serving.
And that's a good example because I see actually internal platforms on the same level of AWS in terms that you're a service provider, you're selling those services to somebody, and your success is based on how much you sell. In a way, exactly. Right? And with renewals, kind of, it's easy to sell. Exactly. Just to be clear, kind of like, it's very easy to sell. It's very hard to renew the contract. If it would be kind of public company, right? Kind of like, will that company that bought from me renew it next year, right? And same thing with platform engineering.
Yeah.
Okay. Inspector Gadget and network policy generation. Do you have an approach on automating the process? My brain stopped. You will need to speak, Scott, until I remember which one I was using for network generation. I know it's your neighbor company, but I forgot the name.
I always use Inspector Gadget. What, Cubescape, you mean? Do they do that?
No, not.
Like Armo guys?
My brain froze.
I thought Armo guys do that also in Cubescape.
They might be doing as well. But
I use Inspector Gadget. I use Inspector Gadget for it. I know Aqua can do this. I know that Palo Alto can do this as well. Inspector Gadget specifically is, I think, the best in the open source area that does this. And the way that I would recommend doing this really depends on two things. If you have high test coverage, I would run this as a parallel to when you run your E2E tests. And basically what you do is run that alongside your E2E tests. And then after that, you stop the process. And those are your network policies that you can base off of, because you basically ran through the entire cycle there. And you can utilize that then in later environments. There are other cases where if you don't have good enough E2E tests, the answer is that I think you set up like a cron job, basically, that will run it when a new deployment happens. You trigger the network policy thing to run for X amount of time, whatever the cycle of your application is. It runs, collects that data, you stop it, and then you apply those. And you do this on a periodic basis. But you could run it through a cron job or something like that that does it. Yeah. In the end, it's shell scripting to automate it.
From Nikos, from big cloud providers, which you prefer and why? And I'll start and then we'll see, Scott. I will give you... So, of the big three, I like AWS the least because it messes up with my brain. Kind of, it's just too complicated, right? Now, the results can be better than anywhere else because you have such low-level stuff over there that probably the end result might be great. But just my brain is not advanced enough for AWS. Now, I was and still kind of am Google fanboy. But lately, like last half a year, I've been kind of putting Google and Azure on the same level, and then so I want to say Azure right now, but only if I never see the console. that's my requirement. So for the things I know, so I usually when I need to use something I never used before, I go to console because to me console is easiest to kind of like somehow imagine what that is and stuff. I start with the console first time and never again. So if I never again have to use something that I never used before, probably Azure.
Yeah.
What's you?
Me, I have to say this personal opinion, not to do with, our company or anything, and opinions do not take this as a official response. My personal opinion is Microsoft Azure as well. I think that purely the advancements that they've made over the last 2 to 3 years, I think have been so huge, from being my least favorite cloud to now being my favorite cloud, that I have to give them that credit. I think that, other clouds have kind of like, I don't want to say stagnated because things like Bedrock and AWS are awesome. Google has some cool things, but like just the leaps forward that Azure has made is amazing. I do agree partially on the portal, but like I really like that they've integrated Copilot into Azure, and I can like all of a sudden just like chat with my Azure account live within the portal, and it just works, and I can whatever. There are things I really like, and architecturally, from a cloud architecture perspective, I'm a huge fan of Azure with like resource groups and how they've done all of that. I think is just really good, and they have the best Kubernetes offering. They beat GKE in my mind about a year ago with their offering is the most holistic Kubernetes offering. So Azure, nice. In my mind.
We're on the same page on that one. That's cool. More or less.
Yeah.
More or less. Okay. Next one from Tin. Have you had a chance to explore open source rate limiting services? If so, which one you recommend? I don't know about you, Scott. I always send, whenever I need to dive into rate limiting or something like that, I always by default end up in a service mesh land somehow. I'm pretty sure that there are tools only for rate limiting, but
yeah,
to me that's when I'm switching
service
to
mesh.
Service mesh.
Yeah, that's me too. In the end, when you need to get into that, when you need to get into rate limiting, you typically need to get into a lot more as well. And like I just say, that's the time when it's right to bite the bullet and go into service mesh and gain along the way MTLS and other like nice things that you get with service mesh.
Okay, there have been a lot of discussions on tools like Cursor, which are helping software engineering. Are there similar tools for platform engineers? Not that I know. And I somehow imagine that Cursor and Copilot and what's not will just gradually become better at wider range of tasks. I don't know whether you saw anything platform related outside of here's a chat.
Right. I was going to say there's a bunch of those like Kate's GPT and whatever. Like, I don't use any of those. From a platform engineering perspective, I use Cursor on a day-to-day basis. A platform engineer is someone that builds Backstage plugins as well, and Cursor is great with that. A platform engineer is someone who writes, crossplane providers. It's great at that. It's someone that writes Go templates for Helm charts or for that. It's great for that.
Because at the end of the day, it's I see platform engineering. Platform engineering is like any other engineering. It's just that so you're more specialized in this area than that area, kind of. But I don't see a significant difference between. Yeah. To me, that's all developers.
Right. You're more of an expert in Python, JavaScript, and Bash than you are in Java, C#, C++, and .NET Core. Okay, and like in the end, it's languages. In the end, you're still writing code. Be that Bash scripts, be that HTML, be that TypeScript, be that PowerShell, or new shell. I'll even throw that out for you there.
You're making me happy, man. I like it.
Okay. Or like KCL, right? I can throw out all the, random weird technology that 0.0% of the industry use, and you're 0.01% of that.
Hey, there's 5 of us. What's wrong with that?
Exactly. But yeah, so anything like that, it's code.
There is one exception. I give you that there are things like Nushell and KCL that is not widely adopted, and I'm using them heavily. But I'm a heavy Nix user, and that is not niche. That's the one of the biggest projects.
Nix packages is not niche. I agree with you. Yes, and you don't use the part that is niche, which is Nix OS. So thank God.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. Anyone did try Grafana Cloud? If yes, can you share your experience? I haven't. And I haven't seen anybody using it, but that does not mean that that's not the case. I have a theory, and I'm going to put a theory out there, and I think it's a sad one, is that most companies' teams start with Grafana projects self-managed. And when it comes to giving money to somebody, they go to Datadog.
I agree. It's like the middle ground there of where Grafana is what I want, but I'm willing to pay. Like where Grafana suffices for what I need, let's say, and I don't need a full APM solution. And Grafana is enough for what I need, but I want to pay is a not that large of a group, I would say.
Yeah. Anecdotal, just to be clear. I don't know about Scott. I don't have the information. It's only based on those that I've seen.
I have no such information. But also, it comes down to always, and this is the big challenge with company-based open source, which Grafana is, right? All of their stuff. In the end, it comes to how do you find that right balance of what do you release to open source, or do you make the open source almost too good that from a business perspective, like there's no real way to sell the product, but on the other hand, or do you make the open source not good enough that you don't actually show the value so no one learns enough in order to want to buy the product? So it's like, you have to find the right balance. I'm not sure Grafana did.
Yeah. I mean, I will add that I think that that's at the same time sad, because I think that we should kind of figure out how can we finance better open source. Kind of,
I agree.
I want Grafana to have more commercial users. I really, really do.
Yeah, so do I. I want all of these companies that build open source projects to do that. I wish that there was a better way today. I think that the answer is, we have to come up with some better model in the industry for, funding open source development in order to make it viable for these companies.
I guess that this comment is relating to me, but I'm going to redirect it now to Scott because he's most likely to do it. Please create a video on ArgoCD implementation in terms of PowerShell script in Azure DevOps. I don't use PowerShell and I don't use Azure DevOps, but I know that you use Azure more than me, so kind of like maybe there is a statistical chance that.
So I don't do anything that touches ArgoCD. That is the challenge.
Oh yeah,
here.
I forgot about that.
But yeah, I do
Here's the thing.
PowerShell. I do Flux CD. I don't do Azure DevOps unless I'm working on a project for a customer that uses Azure DevOps. I'm not a fan of Azure DevOps. Use GitHub. It's owned by the same company. I'm not, offending, hopefully, anyone here. GitHub is what you should use. In my mind, like companies that use Azure DevOps, I get it. I'm not a fan. But yeah, no. PowerShell is the only one here that I have like real experience in.
No,
of those things.
From my side, the truth is that every once in a while, I go back to PowerShell and say, I'm going to make myself dive into it. And within first 15 seconds, I get discouraged by commands starting with capital. I know this is stupid what I'm going to say, but starting with capital letters, kind of like, and I know that you don't have to use capital
It's case
letters.
insensitive. It's case insensitive. Yes.
I know, but my brain, when I go to the docs, just kind of like blows. I know that you don't have to do it, but there's something off-putting. I don't know.
Okay.
But now, the important thing I think is that I don't believe that, and I feel that this applies equally to ArgoCD as to Flux. I don't think that anybody should be thinking about those things in terms of Azure DevOps or Jenkins or this or that, right? You should think in terms of how do I put stuff into Git so that those tools can synchronize it into the cluster, right? And start outside. Don't start with DevOps, Azure DevOps, or anything like that. Kind of like, I don't know, use YQ or use Cargo, or if you're at ArgoCD, or I don't know, Promote or something, or whatever it is, right? And then it's easy to put it.
So the only time when I say in like certain cases where you do want to integrate the two or think about it together is where a pipeline would push the manifest to Git and then would, like, for example, do a Flux Git repository reconcile, where you may have some phase that you want to run after the deployment, so you can actually trigger a reconcile using like the Flux CLI or using the Argo CLI. I'm guessing Argo has this capability.
Yes.
Where you can reconcile like now and then be able to run your tests afterwards. That can be easier for people to understand until we figure out as an industry how to visualize event-driven CI/CD. But in the end, what that gives me is I don't need to move to event-driven CI/CD, but I still get the benefits of GitOps and consistent reconciliation, even though from my pipeline's perspective, it's a synchronous task, right? So it kind of like fits that middle ground for companies that aren't willing to make that full jump into event-driven.
No. And I know that what I'm going to say is too complicated for many. I'm strictly against somebody using... I don't mind if people don't use GitOps, but if you're pushing to Git and stuff like that, I'm strictly against using kube control wait. Because all the what you mentioned before, like ArgoCD, that's basically kube control apply or kube control wait, right? I want no interaction with that cluster. What I would propose is have something in your cluster that will push, I don't know, event to nuts or something, and then from your pipeline, communicate with nuts or with Kafka or push another, I don't know, something else than access to the cluster. And I know that this is something people are not happy with, but I'm very unhappy with.
I don't have an issue with the pipeline having access to Kubernetes if it is read-only access.
Yeah, but if you do, maybe I misunderstood. If you do something like sync.
All it needs is the ability on the ArgoCD application itself to be able to annotate it. Basically, Flux and ArgoCD, I'm guessing Argo is the same way, it basically annotates a application. That's all that it does.
Okay,
it
so
annotates with reconcile now.
waiting for that annotation to appear in a way.
Well, you annotate it or you can wait. Either way, like however you want to do it. If you want it to trigger automatically, so you would do it that way or whatever. But I don't have an issue with integrating it there as long as you're not kubectl applying anything. Like, don't kubectl apply, push to Git and then kubectl apply. Have ArgoCD or Flux do the apply, but you can tell ArgoCD or Flux, hey man, do this now. Like, please reconcile so that I don't need to wait. I don't have an issue with that personally, but yeah.
Aditya, why entry levels DevOps jobs are diminishing? I don't know whether they're diminishing, but if they are, my interpretation, not based on any data, is that they're diminishing because companies are getting disappointed with the results of DevOps being wrongly implemented, even though they think that they're done well. And then they're changing it to doing the same thing under the umbrella of platform engineering. And then platform engineering entry jobs are going up and doing the same thing. But
exactly.
I don't think that there is such a thing. If there would be a DevOps engineer, which I don't think that there is, I don't think that there are such things as entry-level jobs in that area.
Nope.
I don't. I think that that's the cause of the problem. It cannot be, and kind of you're managing system, kind of like production, right? Kind of like, and you're dealing. Your company is making silly decision that you know everything about everything, which is wrong. But that's what companies are doing. And then say entry level. How can you do entry level? Right. I don't understand. And no offense, I don't think everybody is entry level at some point, but be entry level of something, not on everything.
Right. Or like, I believe that like when you look at like who becomes a good DevOps engineer and all of that, like a junior DevOps engineer should have previously been a senior operations. Or at least been a junior operations for a few years, or a junior developer for a few years, and then they moved into this. Meaning, like, I have a major issue, and like I see this in the industry of people that start their careers with DevOps instead of starting from, let's say, the infra side. When it comes to like debugging Kubernetes, and they have no clue that a namespace is not just an object in Kubernetes, but there's this idea of a Linux namespace and like how like the underlying technology actually works. Without understanding these core concepts, you're kind of in like this la-la land, and like it makes it very difficult to like actually debug things where you have to go out to journal CTL. You have to start looking through, whatever different things at the OS level. In the end, a pod, which is in a container or more, is just a process running inside of a separated system namespace within your Linux machine. And therefore, you have to understand those things. So I believe a good DevOps engineer, I hate that term, but a good, what we call today DevOps engineer, has to start from operations or from development.
Let me try to rephrase. I don't think that there should be DevOps jobs for entry-level engineers. There can be entry-level DevOps for a senior engineer.
Correct.
I think that, we are then talking about the same thing. Okay, quick, let me just sort of take the value for the money, whatever. Again, Codefresh. There you have courses, GitOps, what's or not. You get certified. Go there. Repeat after me. Learn.codefresh.io. Learn.codefresh.io. Go there.
Learning.
Learning.
You were saying the wrong URL.
Man, learning.codefresh.io. 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 Use Victor as the code, 50% off. They will be happy. You will be happy. I will be happy. Everybody's happy. Do it now, right away. Okay. Going back to comments. Oh, now I need to find out where are we. Okay. How can cloud system administrators utilize AI to improve service security, reliability, and performance? Are there any particular AI models that I should look at? As far as I know, there are no specific AI models for system administrators or cloud. There are more generic models. I might be wrong, right?
So again, there are fine-tuned models within these companies that are being used. So like, Exactly. So there are fine-tuned models that are, whatever, or distilled models that are created like by Azure, AWS, whatever, that they use in their systems for whatever. You can also do that yourself based off of your own data and like retrain a model and all of that and fine-tune it. It's not an area that I know enough in to actually give any recommendations there. I just use general purpose models.
Me too.
Whatever cursor gives me in the dropdown, that's what I use.
Exactly. Scott is the guy who convinced me on Cursor. I've been using it now for 2 months or so. Amazing. Patrick, is there a reason to still separate dev and ops teams, even though doing automation, infrastructure, cloud, and stuff may be in a regulated environment? Now, a little background, at least from my side, right? I was the person who was always break the walls, remove the separation. But now I'm the opposite. I'm very much in favor of separation if on the other side is a service provider. So I have no problem with AWS being separated from me. The AWS is effectively extension of my team, just to be clear. Kind of like, I don't work in AWS, but I consider them extension of my team. I'm completely separated from them because they're giving me services that I can use, that I can understand. I don't need ever to call AWS unless something goes terribly wrong. Right?
Yep.
If we do such a separation internally, that's fine. What is not fine is separation there is an ops team, you open a Jira ticket and you pray to your deity of choice that you will ever get something and that something will be what you want and so on and so forth. But if you become AWS-like provider within your company, I think that it's perfectly fine to separate dev and ops teams. As long as ops teams are service providers who are actually listening to the feedback of their users.
Yes. So I believe that dev and ops need to be separated. I think that the idea of a full stack engineer and all of that stuff is always a failure. Trying to throw too much into one thing creates a mediocre everything instead of really good at their specific things. Separation of concern, separation of concern, separation of concern. That is the goal here. But as Victor mentioned, we have to have clear boundaries of roles and responsibilities, and we have to know very clearly what is my responsibility, what is yours, have contracts between us like we have with AWS. I don't mean signing a contract, but we have to have like an API contract almost between us. How do developers consume things from us? How do we get feedback from developers? And that's where platform engineering comes into the picture, I think. That's what enables this. And when it comes to platform engineering, the key thing is platform as a product. You have to treat your platform as a product. That means that the consumers of the platform are your customers. Thank you, Pivotal, for pushing that idea of platform as a product into the world. And, we need to treat our platforms as products. They don't need to be off-the-shelf products, right? No. We treat our internal one as a product.
I will just add one thing. Push it as a product, but not as a monopoly product. If you push it as a product and say you have to use this or you're fired, no.
Well, that's not like a product.
Huh?
That's not like a product, right? If you think of it as a product where I'm selling to someone, I can't tell, Upbound, right? You have to use AWS. No, I want to sell you to use AWS or Azure or Google or my service, right?
I mean, it could be a product in a monopoly. There are cases in a real world where you're the only provider of a product. So,
yeah. Right. But, yeah.
Okay. What are the most anticipated features in the upcoming ArgoCD 3.0 release? I haven't been following. I don't know what's going on in 3.0. And I suspect that Scott hasn't been following because that's not his tool. Yeah. Am I correct, Scott?
Unless it's migrating to just using Flux and retiring the application CR, I don't see any, highly anticipated features from my perspective.
Okay. We have now, this is going to get nasty here. What do you think about Red Hat OpenShift? I will start by saying I haven't used it like in a year, so I don't know what is OpenShift today. I know that if a company I work with uses it, kind of, yeah, okay, cool. You're using OpenShift. That's life, right? But I never like the idea that it's a fork. It's the only Kubernetes distribution that is a fork, as far as I know, with a bunch of things that shouldn't be there.
Yeah. So I will split this into two parts. I think that OpenShift in the end is a marvel of engineering, if we call it that. It is quite impressive what they have done. There is a reason why many large enterprises use it. I, as a person who cares a lot about open source and about Kubernetes and about portability and CNCF and things like that, have a major challenge with tools like OpenShift that I think, deviate too far from the industry standards and have to be unique in everything. Cryo instead of Containerd, Podman instead of Docker, routes, which, yes, there is support now for Ingress, but routes, we have to implement security differently. We have to implement this differently, right? So, I just don't like that. Now, what I will say, though, is that, it sells really well because when you sell to someone clicky UI, they have a very nice UI. I will say that some of the stuff that they're building now is very interesting, like the Red Hat OpenShift virtualization is actually quite interesting, a offering around KubeVirt, basically, to run virtual machines in Kubernetes. They have some really good technology there. I just wish it was more aligned with the upstream instead of the standard Red Hat, we do things just a bit differently than everyone else does.
And to be clear, I think that I agree about their engineering is actually, they're doing great stuff. And I'm pretty sure that actually using their policy allows them to move faster even within open source community, right? It's just, I'm not convinced that overall that's how we should do things, right?
Right. But by the way, I'm not sure that routes may be better than Ingress. Okay, I'm not saying which is better or not, but the industry decided on Ingress, right? Like their security posture, which is secure by default, unlike Kubernetes, which is completely insecure by default. That is great. Like, I wish Kubernetes were secure by default. I wish that Docker did not run with a daemon that required root access. Like, yes, I get why Cryo, I get why Podman, I get why all of these things. Yes, and many of them are better than the industry standard. There's still an industry standard, though, and a deviation from industry standard. And that's my... and I know this is a hard one, and I know they tried in the past sometimes, but I wish you would see more contribution of this stuff to the upstream project rather than let's create our own similar thing, but that does it the way that we want it to.
Same page there. Okay, next one. In your opinion, why is AKS better than GKE? Scott, go.
So, AKS is better than GKE in a few different levels. Number one, it's the most holistic solution in terms of like what they've added on top of it. The new AKS Automatic or Auto Mode, I forget which one it's called. I think it's AKS Automatic. But gives me basically the same simplicity as GKE Autopilot gave me, but it's standard Kubernetes and it works. It works
Same,
is the key
works.
There. Exactly.
I could never manage to make GKE Autopilot work for me. There is always something.
Exactly. Right. And AKS Automatic is standard. What I like about it also is that you can always escape out of it if you wanted to. You're not locked in, and you can also add like specific node pools that you want to manage on your own. So it's not like it's here, we'll manage 90%. You can take 10% if you want to, but you don't lose. It's not like an all or nothing game like GK Autopilot is. So I like that. The amount of add-ons and extensions that they have. So it's weird that they have add-ons and extensions and the difference between the two. But I like the fact that, for example, their GitOps integration is great. It uses Flux CD under the hood, the correct GitOps tool to use. But what I like is that they do that, unlike let's use Anthos Config Manager and build our own thing. Like what Google likes to do there. I like their tight integration with bringing in open source tools. They're bringing in of Istio into the picture here, Gateway API, all of these things that they're bringing in, KEDA, things like that, right? It's just very, very fluid. Their Carpenter integration is great that they built in called Node Auto Provisioner. It's just really seamless and it works.
You know, one of the differences I feel, and this is a feeling rather than something I can back up, is that both Microsoft and Google are very good at supporting and including open source into their offerings. But Google insists that it needs to be started by Google. Yep. Right? It needs to be an open source project that was started by Google, and they gave it away and stuff like that. So it's not a trick, right? But I have a feeling that if that project was started by somebody else, we don't want it.
Right.
I cannot prove that, so don't hold me, but that's my feeling. Well, Microsoft is kind of, this is a good thing, kind of like this should be part in my Kubernetes offering. Yeah, let's go for it, right?
Right. Look at this. Microsoft bought Inspector Gadget, like the guys behind Inspector Gadget. They became, yes. This is, I think, already like a year, maybe a year and a half ago already. They bought them. And what are they doing? It's not under the Microsoft organization. It's still Inspector Gadget. Why did they buy them? Because they wanted to support the development of awesome open source tools that, and they still haven't integrated into AKS. Now, hopefully they may. I don't know what they're planning on doing. But like they bought open source to support this open source tool that's continuing to be developed in the eBPF world. Like they're heavily invested into the open source, even if it's not built by them. And that, like, it's really awesome, the stuff that they're doing there.
Did you have experience with WASM in any production environment? I haven't, but I have a very strange relation with WASM. I recognize that it's a better format than, let's say, containers, even though it's not necessarily good. But it came a bit too late, and I don't see enough advantages for me to switch. Would I start a new project with WASM? Maybe. But then there is no ecosystem, so I have a very strange relationship. I don't know, what's your status with WASM?
Currently, I'm not a fan of WASM. I get the value. I think that WASM makes sense for what it was built for, which is web assembly.
You're talking about that.
So use it for the web. Yes, it's great because it allows me to, if I have a Rust code base, run Rust in the browser, and I don't need to run JavaScript in the browser if I don't want to write JavaScript. Or I could do Go, or I could do any compiled language that can compile target basically to WASM, right? So I think there is a huge use case for WASM. I just do not buy anymore into this story of WASM in Kubernetes as, you know, the savior of all, whatever, the new format. The difference between it and containers, though, is that you actually have to change your code to work in WASM. Like, it can't just be just any standard code that works in WASM, because there are constraints around network, around this and things, file system access. There are constraints in WASM. With the container, any source code you have, take it, compile, do it, put it in a Docker file, it will work. Or 90% of code will work as is. 90% of code won't work as is to compile to WASM without making changes, from like the testing that I've done.
The way I see it as if WASM appeared, give or take, at the same time as Docker, I wouldn't be surprised if today we would be using mostly WASM. I wouldn't be surprised. It just came too late. I mean, I'm talking now about WASM, not browser WASM. I'm talking about WASM
Yes,
as a backend.
we would be today, but it would have taken a lot longer than it took with containers.
Probably. But kind of, and probably Docker, if they started at the same time, would become popular much sooner than WASM. But kind of like, we would be building the ecosystem around, let's say, both, not right?
Right.
And then we would be figuring out solutions at the same time for both, right? But now kind of like the world is made around containers, and it's so hard to actually redo that world in a way without justification. Right. I mean, there is justification, but without enough justification. Kind of, imagine that you, Scott, you go to a customer and say, okay, with WASM you get this, and that. Go rewrite your whole system.
Yeah. No, that's where, like, I think there are a few things that, are... I don't think WASM is what's going to catch off. I think what could catch off are, like, these micro VMs that we're starting to see, like, all over the place being used. Not microkernels, micro VMs, right? Which are different as a level, like Kata containers type style, Firecracker, things like that allow me to run a container, but in full isolation. Because is WASM really any better than a container in 90% of things? No, it's better from an isolation security perspective. It may start up a bit quicker, but it doesn't start up much quicker than a distroless image or a scratch image with a Go binary inside of it. It doesn't start up much quicker than that, right? And so that's where I say, like, I think that we're going to move from a security perspective, we're going to move to micro VM based architectures way before we move to something like WASM that's going to require us to, after we just re-architected to microservices over 15 years, now re-architect for WASM. I just don't see that happening in the next decade.
But I think that's the key, kind of re-architect. Yeah. Because really with containers, it's with containers initially it was re-architect, but at the end we ended up kind of not even re-architecting, but kind of, okay, you keep your web sphere over there, kind of like new stuff starts.
Right.
Anyways.
And that's where Kata or gvisor or those things come into place, because I don't need to re-architect anything. It just changed from container D standard to container D shim of Kata containers, and you have the isolation and no difference from a developer perspective.
I will say in advance, no, enough. Anyone with experience in Datadog and Datadog able to compare them. I haven't used them deep enough to be able to compare. I don't know about you, Scott.
Anyone? Yes. The two of us? No.
Exactly. Good catch. What's the best place to keep large Kubernetes clusters up to date, upgrade in place, build new, and transition over something else magical?
Kubernetes fleet managers. You need a fleet manager that helps you push this out. I believe once you get to a certain scale, that's where things like a Spectral Cloud, TMC, Azure Fleet, whatever it ends up being, depending. If you're using OpenShift here, that came up before, use Advanced Cluster Manager to manage your clusters. If you are in the Tanzu world, then use Tanzu Mission Control. If you're multi-cloud, all of that, use something like Spectral Cloud, Palette. Use D2IQ, use Cluster API, use whatever it ends up being. But use a fleet manager. That is the best way to do this because it makes it reproducible, easy. There's a system, there's governance, there's clear paths, and it makes it easier.
And one thing, don't wait 3 years.
Yes.
To upgrade. Please don't. It's okay if you don't upgrade every quarter, but kind of don't wait 3 years. Yeah. Go or Rust for developing scripts for Kubernetes.
Go.
I will say go. And not because Go is better than Rust, just to be, at least in my case, because of the support.
Kubernetes.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is written in Kubernetes. You will find libraries, everything. The same, if somebody asks me for machine learning AI, Python or something else, it's Python. And I don't like Python. I don't like it.
Right. Yeah, I hate Python, but if you're doing AI ML stuff, Python.
What else? Okay. Okay, this is for you definitely because I'm an ArgoCD user. what are you most excited about Flux or Flagger? I feel that Flagger never lifted off. And when I say Flagger, I mean neither Flagger or Argo rollouts, which, if I'm right, feels sad. Because
it is sad. It is sad. I mean, I think Flagger and Argo rollouts took up at about the same. They're at about the same parv level, not really skyrocketing at all. FluxCD, in my mind, they're better support for OCI and all of that that they've been doing is awesome. I really like the work they're doing around OCI support. And I think in general, I like FluxCD as a tool for GitOps because it actually does things architecturally smart, and separation of concerns of Helm is treated like Helm, Customize is treated like Customize, and I like that they call it the GitOps toolkit. And it allows you to really piece and match all these things together for your own needs, how you want to. ArgoCD is more user-friendly, and FluxCD is much better for the platform engineer because it gives you more flexibility from the back-end perspective.
I remember, what was it, maybe 3 years ago? I don't remember. I don't know if you were involved in that when both communities were talking and trying to figure out how to build a common engine between the two and kind of compete on a higher level. I don't know who offended whom and why that broke apart, but I had actually very high hopes for that back in the day.
Yeah, there was even a project that someone created that I saw the other day that actually integrated the two. That it's a something where it does loopback reconciliation of an app that ends up creating FluxCD resources that do the actual reconciliation, but that show up back in Argo's UI. It was a complete mishmash. But it allowed you to use application set type features and whatever above the better implementations of the core things, which is a customization, Git repository, OCI repository, Helm release, whatever.
We're done. We're at the top of the hour. There are a few questions we haven't answered left, but now those of you who wrote those questions, now kind of write them earlier. You have bigger chance for them to be answered. Thank you so much for watching, attending. See you next week, probably. We'll find out. Cheers.
Cheers.